Hi, this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, and you're listening to Briefings Direct. For the past 30 years, Citrix has made a successful habit of challenging the status quo. That includes delivering applications as streaming services to multiple users, making the entire PC desktop into a secure service, enhancing networks that optimize applications delivery, pioneering infrastructure as a service, now known as public cloud, and supplying a way to take enterprise applications and data to the mobile edge. Now, Citrix is at it again by remaking the very nature of digital workplaces and redefining the very nature of applications and business intelligence. How has one company been able to not only reinvent itself again and again, but make major and correct bets on the future direction of global information technology? To find out, I'm now joined by three of Citrix's chief executives over the past 30 years. Please welcome Roger Roberts, Citrix CEO and Chairman from 1990 to 2002. Mark Templeton, CEO of Citrix from 2001 to 2015. And David Henschel, who became the company's CEO in July of 2017. Welcome to you all. You know, so much has changed across the worker productivity spectrum or environment for the past 30 years. The technology has been rapidly changing. What hasn't changed is the human factor, people. How is it that we're able to keep moving the needle forward with technology and try to get more productivity when we sort of have this lump of clay that's really hard to manage, hard to move? Mark?
The lump of clay actually is changing as rapidly as the technology because of the changing demographics of the workforce. So baby boomers followed by generation of millennials, Gen Y, Gen X, and then Gen Z that's coming 20 years from now. They'll be making important decisions. So that clay is actually changing and justification for the innovation, invention of new technology in the workplace.
I suppose the trick is to be able to create technology that human factor will adopt. It's difficult to have a chicken and egg relationship when you don't know what's going to drive the other. David, what have you seen in the past 30 years at Citrix that has given you an edge in terms of finding that right formula for the chicken and the egg?
Citrix has always had an amazing ability to stay focused on connecting people and information and doing it in a way that is secure and it's managed and it's available so that we can abstract away a lot of the complexity that's inherent with technology. Because at the end of the day, all we're really focused on is driving those outcomes and allowing people to be as productive, as successful, as engaged as humanly possible by giving them the tools to, as we frame it up, work in a way that's most effective for them. And that's really about creating the future of work, allowing people to be unleashed so that they can do their best work.
And Roger, when you started with this, so much of the IT world was focused on platforms and applications and how one drives the other. You seem to have elevated yourself above that and focused on services, on delivery of productivity, because after all, they're supposed to be productivity applications. How are you able to sort of see above and beyond that platform application relationship?
Because I'm really old. No, we certainly grew up when the PC came on the scene and everybody was, personal computer and LAN, Novell, NetWare, and networking. Everybody wanted their own computer, driven primarily by things like Lotus, spreadsheets, WordPerfect, Ashton Tate's, DBase, that kind of situation, which is where the tremendous bulk of the market was then and for the foreseeable future. However, with the background that I shared with Ed, we had been in the real world, working all the way down from mainframes through mini computers and now PCs. And so we knew there was a world out there that model, it really sucks. And the trick was to take advantage of the increasing processing power that the PC we knew was going to deliver and put it in a robust environment that would have the stability where we could go in and target specific customers with a specific profile of application, and they would always warm to our story. Our story was very foreign to the mass market, I would say. And things like running ads or trying to cast a broad net or trying to search for leads would have been a waste of time and money, even though we had a lot of discussions about how much to do that sort of stuff. It made no sense in those days because the vast majority of the world had no idea what we were talking about.
And on that note, what was the killer application? What were those use cases that you knew were paid dirt, even if it wasn't quite mainstream yet?
Probably the easiest one to relate to is personnel systems. Brown and Root Construction out of Houston, Texas, worldwide operation. Most of their offices were on construction sites and temporary buildings, and they had a great deal of difficulty managing their personnel files, salaries, when someone was promoted or a review, an increase or a new hire or whatever. And the only way you could really do it in the client-server LAN world was to replicate the database. And let me tell you, nobody wants to replicate their HR database across probably 9,000 or 10,000 sites. But we could come in and say, we can solve that problem for you, and you can keep all your data secure in your corporate headquarters. Take care of it. It will always be synchronized because there's only one copy. And we can give you the same degree of capability that the LAN-based PC user is experiencing over a fairly slow telecommunications hookup. And that really resonated with where you could get to people like that had problems like that. It was I won't say it was an easy sale, but then the selling obstacles became you're a small company, you're vulnerable. How can I trust you to put a major application on your technology when you may go out of business? It was never the technology. It was never the ability to get it done. It was more like staying power. And that turned out to be the biggest thing.
David, boy, it sounds a little bit familiar because today we're still dealing with distance and the capability of the network and where should the data reside and how do we manage privacy and secure regulatory compliance for our customers. When you listen to something that was their use cases and requirements 30 years ago, does it ring a bell?
Well, it absolutely resonates because a lot of what we're doing is dealing with the inherent complexity in enterprise IT. And customers today some of our largest customers are dealing with thousands and thousands of underlying applications. And that can be everything from the mainframe applications that Roger's talking about through different eras of client server, PC, web, mobile, so on and so forth. And a lot of those applications are still in use today because they're adding value to the business, and they're really hard to pull out of the infrastructure. So what we can do is help them abstract away a lot of that complexity by in many ways, I would think about what we've done over the last 30 years is starting by helping organize IT, allowing them to manage all that complexity on the application tier and present that out in a way that is easier to consume, easier to manage, easier to secure. Several years ago, we were bringing together all of these application types in a way that I would describe as helping to move from organizing IT to organizing work, bringing not only the apps you need, but access to content and files, whether those reside in one of the on-premise data repositories, or those reside in any cloud, including Citrix Cloud, making that accessible across universal endpoint management. And then you layer underneath that all kinds of platform capabilities around security and access and management and analytics. And where we're taking the company in the future is one step beyond organizing work to really helping guide and predict work, driving more engagement, more productivity by leveraging ML and AI and a lot of these other capabilities to be able to present work to people in real time, to be able to really suggest and advise on what they need to be most productive. Mm-hmm. That's just a natural evolution back to that same fundamental concept of connecting people with the information they need to be productive in real time.
But one of the ways that you can be instrumental in improving on that tough problem, Mark, is when you're in the right place in the ecosystem. And you have continuously been able to position yourselves between the data and the systems of record and the device and the end user, and then know that network enough to make the best of it. You made a big bet on virtualization as a means to do that. How do we continue to understand the relationship between the technology and the productivity? Is being in the right place at the right time the secret sauce?
Well, I suppose generically, yes, in just about every aspect of life, especially the timing of invention, innovation, how it's introduced, and how to get it adopted. I think the company, adopted pretty early on this philosophy around from an ecosystem perspective of we always thought of it as a Switzerland type of mindset where we're willing to work with everyone in the ecosystem, devices, networks, applications, et cetera, and even through their evolution, so that we were basically device, network, and application independent around the kind of the value proposition that David and Roger talked about. And I think that type of cooperative mindset, it's always in style because it is customer centered. It's based upon the value it derives for customers. And my experience is that in the older days, perhaps when you had a lot of religious wars in the industry, the biggest losers were the customers because they had to pay for the fight and the incompatibilities, et cetera. And we, I think, made a great reputation for ourselves by being able to come in and provide a DMZ or some, detente kind of a platform for detente so that customers could manage and control their own destiny. And I think the company has a culture and a mindset. It's always been that way. All right. When a customer's better off, we're better off. But it starts with making the customer better off.
Roger, we've seen a lot of companies that have had a great leap in innovation, but then sort of plateaued and stuck with that innovation. Maybe they got into the innovator's dilemma, as it's been called. That hasn't been the case with Citrix. You've been able to reinvent yourselves pretty regularly, pretty frequently. How do you do that as a culture? How do you get people to stay innovative, even when you've got a very successful set of products? How do you not rest on your laurels?
I can help you on that because actually I think that for the most part, people don't change until they have to, right? And to actively disrupt yourself is a very unnatural act. I think that being aware of an innovator's dilemma is the first step in being able to act on it. And we did have an innovator's dilemma here, multiples of occasions. And I think that we saw the wall with the cliff or whatever, and we made a turn. We made a decision. We made a bet, et cetera. And so I think that actually we made the innovator's dilemma work for us because we used it as a catalyst for driving change in the organization. And when you have a lot of smart engineers, if you help them see that, they'll fix it. They'll innovate.
And we've seen the pace of business ramp up in the 30 years you all have been doing this to such a degree that you can go through that cycle in 9 or 10 months, never mind 9 or 10 years. David, is that something that keeps you up at night, is how to not get stuck and be one step ahead of where the industry is going?
I actually talk about it a lot when speaking in more industry terms because, the sine wave of cycles is getting much more compressed and much, higher volatility, let's say. The reason is simply that, today we've got devices that are absolutely transient. Devices and ways to consume technology and information are coming and going at a pace that is extraordinary. Same thing is true for applications and infrastructure, which not that many years ago was a major project to bring in and install and manage. Today it's a collection of mesh services in so many different areas that by their very nature become transient. And so instead of trying to fight these forces, we look for ways to embrace them and make them part of what we do. And so when we talk about the workspace platform, it is absolutely device independent, infrastructure independent, because our customers, we recognize that our customers have different choices they're making, very much in the Switzerland approach that Mark talks about, but also the fact that those choices change over time. And being able to support that through that change is critical for our own staying power and stickiness, but also gives them the level of comfort that we're going to be with them wherever they are on that journey. But it's the sheer laws of physics that have taken these disruptions to a place where not that many years ago, it was how fast physical goods could transfer across state or national boundaries. Today's market moves on a tweet or a notification or a new service or something that was just not even a capability a few years ago.
At the time I retired, we were roughly 500 million, $500 million, growing tremendously. I mean, we grew a factor of 10 in 4 years, and even that amazes me. We had a piece of the market at that time which was 100% Windows-centric. At the same time, you could look at that and tell we could be a multi-billion-dollar company just in that space. But here comes the internet with web apps, servers, new technology, HTML, Java, whatever. And you knew that the world we were on had a very lucrative and long run. But if we didn't do something, inevitably it was going to die. I think it would have been a slow death, but it would have been death. Yeah.
The relationship with Microsoft that you brought up, I think it's not out of the question to say that you were helping them avoid the innovator's dilemma, because in many instances that I can recall, you were able to perhaps push Microsoft off of its safety block, maybe not as quickly as the industry would have perhaps liked or seen, but it seems to me that you were an accelerant to the Microsoft future. Is that fair, Mark?
Well, I don't think we were an accelerant to Microsoft per se. I think we were, helping Microsoft extend the reach of Windows into places and use cases, et cetera, that they weren't providing a solution for. But the Windows brand was so powerful and helped us certainly on our IPO. In fact, I think the tagline on our IPO was that Citrix extends the reach of Microsoft Windows in all of these places and ways in terms of devices and different types of connectivity and, over the internet, over dial-up and wireless networks, which were still in their infancy. And so I think, our value and our mindset around Microsoft was always to be a value-added kind of partner. Even though we had a little bit of a rough spot with them, I think most people didn't really understand it. And, and I think Microsoft did, and we worked out a great deal that's been fantastic for both companies for many, many years.
David, as we look to the future and we think about the role of AI and machine learning, having the right data is such an important part of that. How is it that of all companies, Citrix has found itself in the catbird seat when it comes to having data, given what we've talked about? Because I don't think people would have thought about Citrix as a data company necessarily, not a systems of record company, for example, not a database company. How did that come to be, and how did these guys help you out with that?
Well, if I think about data and analytics right now, over the last couple of years, we've spent an extraordinary amount of time building out what I'll call an analytics platform that sits underneath the workspace platform is a way to think about it. And we've got enough places that we can instrument to be able to capture, information from everything, from looking backwards across the network, the application, the user, the location, files, and all of those various attributes. And we collect just this rich data set of many, many different things. And with taking a more of a platform approach allows us to step back and start introducing modules, if you will, that can use this information in not just a reporting way, but in a way to actually drive enforcement across the platform, because those great data collection points are also places where we can enforce a policy.
What's interesting about what you just talked about, David, is that it's the metadata that has become way more important in many cases than the foundational database data. And the metadata about what's going on in the network, what's going on with the relationship between the user and their devices, what's going on between the systems and how the IT infrastructure is performing. So did you have a clue about that, Mark, that the metadata about what's going on across this IT environment would become so powerful one day?
Absolutely. And while I was here at Citrix, we didn't have the technical platform yet to handle big data the way you can handle it now. And so I'm really thrilled to hear that under David's leadership, the company is diving into that, because that data is behavioral data around how people are consuming systems, which systems are, how they're working, are they available, are they performant? There are things you can express around security, et cetera, because I think one of the things, and I think back in, again, my time, in one of the imagination sorts of presentations, we would show that we'd like to get to a point where IT would have the equivalent of quarterly brokerage report that you get, all right, where you can see all the classes of investments, how much is invested in this type of app, that type of app, that type of app, the data, where it's residing, and its performance, availability, et cetera, over time. And so that you can make important decisions, like simple ones, like when do we turn this application off? Because right now, there's very little data to help IT make hard decisions like that. and lots of other decisions. So that was always in the idea, but I'm really thrilled to see the company doing it.
Right. So before you had the ability to deal with the big data that was being generated, you were in that catbird seat of across the ecosystem, seeing what was really going on. But now you have an opportunity to really work with that. So to your next point, David, how do you take what metadata is now available, given that we have these systems that can not only handle big data, but we can analyze it in real time?
Well, the applications are pretty broad, actually. I mean, if you think about our data platform right now, we're able to, do lots of closed loop analytics across security, operations, performance, and really drive all three of those different vectors to improve overall performance. And you can customize that in just infinite number of ways, so customers can manage it in the way is right for their business. But what's really interesting, though, is as you start developing a pattern of behaviors in the way people are going about work, we can start to predict and guide work in ways that were just unavailable not that long ago, helping serve up information before you need it based on the graph of other things that you're doing. Great example right now is you think about a mobile application for an airline today. And, the smart ones are tied into the other things that you're doing. So an hour before your flight, it already gives you a notification that it's time to leave for the airport. And when you get to your car, you've got your map of the fastest route to the airport already plotted out on the go as you check in, bio or some other form of authentication. And it just simplifies these workflows in a very, very intuitive, obvious way. And we've got amazing amounts of information that'll take that example and allow us to really drive that through in a business context.
So, Roger, in 30 years, we've gone from delivering a handful of applications to people in a way that's acceptable given the constraints of the environment and the infrastructure, to a point where the infrastructure doesn't have any constraints to speak of. We're actually able now to redefine work and tell people how they should be more productive. How does that strike you? Is that something you could have perhaps possibly imagined back then?
Quite frankly, as good as I am, no. I mean, it's beyond my comprehension. I was in Texas and we had an airplane that broke down and we had to get back. Using my smartphone only, I was able to charter a flight, sign a contract with DocuSign, pay it with an ACH transfer, track him on FlightAware to the nearest 15 seconds, get how much time it takes us to get home, arrange Uber. Can I imagine that? No, it still amazes me. It still truly amazes me.
Well, you guys would know this better than me, but it seems to me that you can run a multinational corporation on a device that fits in your palm. Is that an exaggeration, Mark?
In many ways, it is. I think you can accomplish a lot with the device in your hand. I mean, to the degree that leadership is largely around communications, and the device that's in your hands can give you information and the ability to communicate. So I'd say, yeah, you can do a lot, but it's not a substitute entirely for other types of tasks and work that it takes to run a big business, including the human relationships.
David, maybe when the Citrix vision of 2020 comes out, will you be able to, perhaps through cloud and AI and the device in your hand, do almost anything?
It's more about having the right information on demand when you need it. And that's a trend that we've seen for quite some time. And if you look at the broader trends in technology, I mean, we're entering the yottabyte era now, which is one with 24 zeros after it. I mean, the amount of information is absolutely staggering. But turning that into something that is actually useful is near impossible. And that's where AI and ML and a lot of these other advancements will allow you to parse through that and give people the freedom of information that has probably just never existed before. So the days of proprietary knowledge and proprietary data are quickly coming to an end. And the businesses that are going to be successful are those that can put the right information at people's fingertips at the right time to interact with different business opportunities. And I think that's what technology is really allowing you to do. And then advancements in network and compute and whatnot of just making that a very near-term reality. And I think we're just on that continuum.
What I would add in the way I've thought about it is that you don't ever realize an era is over until you're in a new era. And I think the digital era is done, okay? And it ended when people woke up every day and started to realize I have too many devices, I have too many apps that do similar things, I've got too many social things to manage and blah and blah and blah. And I have to keep track of all that stuff in a way where I know what to try to look at and when and so forth. And I think the technologies underlying AI, ML, et cetera, are defining an era I call the contextual era. And a contextual era, it does exactly what David just described. It does predict, and it does make the right information available in context of, like Roger was saying, bringing all those things together for him. And, obviously it could even be easier than the experience that he had. So I think we're in that contextual era now because of the amount of data, the amount of apps, and the plethora of devices that we all have access to.
David, how would you characterize this next era, and how do we maybe imagine us having a conversation in 30 years still with Citrix talking about how it's kept up with the times?
Yeah, I think Mark put it absolutely the way I would in terms of just being able to be contextual in such a way that it brings purpose through the chaos or the volume of data or information that exists out there. And I'd say what we really try to do in many dimensions is almost think about our technology platform as a way that creates space, space for people to be successful, space for them to really do their best work. And you do that by removing a lot of the clutter. You remove a lot of the extraneous things that bog people down. And when we talk about it with other customers, the statistics behind the scenes are amazing, right? We're interrupted every 2 minutes in this world right now. A tweet, a text, an email, a notification. And science shows that, humans are not very good at multitasking. Our brains just haven't evolved that way.
It goes back to that lump of clay we talked about at the beginning. Some things don't change.
When you're interrupted, it takes you 20 minutes on average to get back to the task at hand. And that's one of the fundamental reasons why the statistics around engagement around the world are horrible. The average company has 85% of their employee base is disengaged. 85%. McKinsey will put a number on that they say it's a $7 trillion annual problem. It's enormous. And we believe that part of that is a technology problem. We've created technologies that aren't really enhancing people's ability to be productive, to be engaged. And so if we can simplify that interaction, allow them to engage in a way that's more intuitive, that is more focused on the task at hand versus the possibility of interruption, it just helps the entire ecosystem move forward. That's the way I think about it.
On that subject of keeping time on your side, it's not very often I get together with 30 years worth of CEOs to talk about things with such a perspective. But for those in our audience who are leaders of companies, small or very large, let's start with you, Roger. What advice would you give to somebody to say, here's how you keep your company alive for 30 years?
Whenever you're running a company, you are running the company. And it puts a lot of pressure on you to not only have to think about the future and when technology is going to change and how you get ahead of the power curve before it's too late, but there's a hell of an operational component. That how do you keep the wheel turning and the crank moving, and how do you keep it functioning, and how do you grow staff, and how do you put in systems and infrastructure? The capability of managing as the company gets bigger, it's enormously more complicated the more you grow and the rate you have to hire. So there's the complexity of the technology and the people and the market and what's going on in the ecosystem, but you can never lose sight of there's an execution component that, in my opinion, you can't lose sight of it because it can kill you quicker than losing sight of the strategy. One of the things that I tried to do was I tried to instill a process in the company where seemingly hard questions were easy because it was part of the fabric of how people measured and kept up with their job and what they were doing and what they were forecasting. Things as simple as, Jennifer, how many support calls are we going to get in the second quarter next year or the fourth quarter of the following year? How do you think about what you need to be able to answer questions like that? How much are we going to sell? Remember, whenever we were selling packaged product through two-step distribution, we had no backlog. Backlog is a foreign concept. So every 30 days, you had to get up and do it again. So I would say it takes a lot of thought And depending on how big you want to be, if you're a CEO listening to me, the most important thing I could suggest you figure out is how big do you want to be? And if you want to be a lifestyle small company, hats off, I admire you. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to be a big company, you need to be putting in process, systems, infrastructure, strategy, market trends now, even though you might not think you need it. And then the other side of that is if you go overboard in that direction, process will kill you. That's where everybody's so ingrained in the process, nobody's questioning, nobody's thinking, they're just going through the process. And that is as deadly as not having one. So process is necessary. Process is not sufficient. Process will help you, and it will also kill you.
Mark, same question for advice to keep a company 30 years young.
Going after Roger is like the toughest thing in the world. I'll focus on sort of where I think what I focused on at Citrix, and that is making sure you have an opinion about the future that you believe strongly enough to bet your career on, number one. And number two, to make sure that you're doing the things that make your business, either your business model, your products, your services, et cetera, more and more relevant over time, so that you're actually executing, and some of the great advice that Roger just gave, against wind that's at your back, so that you're using the normal forces of change and evolution in the world, okay, to work for you, because it's already too hard and you need all the help you can get. So, like a simple example is we saw the whole idea of consumerization of IT pretty early on and had an opinion about that. We put in a bring your own device policy and an experimental program. We were, among the first. We certainly evangelized it. We developed a lot of technology to help support it and make it work and make it better. And that became more and more relevant over time as the workforce got younger and younger and younger and wanted to bring their own device to the office. So that's an example. So we had that opinion and we made a bet on it, and and it put some wind at our back in that particular example.
And so, David, for you, you're going to be able to get tools that these guys couldn't get. You're going to have AI and machine learning on your side. You're going to be able to get rid of some of those distractions. You're going to take advantage of the intelligence embedded in the network, but you're still going to also have to be the best of what the human form factor, that lump of clay, that wetware can do. So what's the CEO of the future going to do in terms of getting the right balance between what companies like Citrix are providing them as tools, but not losing track of what's the best thing that a human brain can do?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, technology and the pace of evolution right now is breaking down the historical hierarchy that has existed in a lot of organizations and created this concept much more of the liquid enterprise, similar to what we've talked about with those that can respond and react in a different way. But what that doesn't ever replace is, back to what Roger and Mark were talking about, is the need to have a future back methodology is one that I subscribe to a lot, where we help people understand here's where we're going, but more importantly, here's why. And then you operationalize that in a way that people have context. And so everybody understands clarity in terms of roles and responsibilities, operational outcomes, milestones, metrics, and how we're going to measure that along the way. And then that becomes a continuous process. There's no such thing as set it and forget it, but without a perspective and a point of view, everything else doesn't have enough purpose. And so that is, you kind of have to marry the two going forward, making sure you're empowering your teams with culture and clarity, and then, turn them loose and let them go.
Productivity in itself isn't necessarily a high motivator.
No, productivity by itself is just a metric, and it can be measured in 100 different ways. I mean, productivity based on understanding clarity in terms of what the outcomes need to be and empowering that so that people can do their best work against that, because it's defined in a very, very individual and unique way. The days of measuring tasks are mostly in the past. Measuring outcomes, which can be somewhat loosely defined, are really where we're going. And so how do we enable that? And that's how I think about it.
I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a sponsored Briefings Direct discussion on how Citrix has made a highly successful habit of challenging the status quo. And we've learned from chief executives over the years how Citrix made major and correct bets on the future direction of global information technology. And they're at it again by remaking the very nature of digital workplaces and redefining the very use of applications and business intelligence. So a big thank you to our special guests, Roger Roberts, Mark Templeton, and David Henshaw. And thanks to our audience as well for joining this Briefings Direct 30 Years of Innovation discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host throughout this series of Citrix-sponsored Briefings Direct discussions. Thanks again for listening. Please pass this on to your IT community and do come back next time.